Hello. Well, welcome to this latest Farnham Society in Conversation. And I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Gavin Stride. Gavin, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. Good to see you, my friend.
Well, as many of you may know, Gavin, and you will perhaps recall that to the surprise of some, surprise of many, late last year, Gavin decided to stand down from his role as director and chief executive of the Maltings after, and let me start with this, Gavin, after quite a stint, if I might put it like
It
that.
was all, yeah, that's true. It was almost 20 years. I know you get less for murder, my friend. But it was time to step down. There were a number of reasons. Nothing, I'm not retiring. I'll go on to do other things. But it just comes a moment where you think, I've taken this as far as I can, and it's time to make way for the next generation of people to come in and take it on. And it was in good health, and I just felt the right thing to do. And I always like to surprise people, so there you go.
Well, it was a surprise. It was a surprise to me because Gavin Stride, the Maltings go together like a cream tea in a way, and you had cream teas actually at your leaving do, I seem to remember. But in terms of being involved in something like the Maltings, I imagine that was quite a difficult decision to step away from it and step down.
I mean, it was difficult to arrive and it was difficult to go. I mean, I grew to be hugely affectionate for the organisation and what it had become. That's true. But you can't rest on past stories.
No.
You've got to admit when you think I've done this, and I was starting to feel like I was running it on memory rather than on imagination. What worked the last time, and that's not good, and it was scary. And who knows, I may have made the wrong decision, but you can't know. You just have to decide and go with your instincts. And so I'm really, really proud of what we achieved. I feel like there was a journey that I arrived at a point where the Maltings, whilst the building had been saved, its sort of sense of why it was there and what it did was less clear. I hope.
Let me come in here because I think you're going to cover ground that I thought we'd start with, because 18 years, as you said, nearly 20 years at the Maltings. So what led you to take the role? Because I imagine 18 years ago things were very different. So I think you came from the East Midlands, is that right?
I did. I came from the North Nottinghamshire coalfields, and so it was a fairly radical move. And on one level I became because it suited my family. My wife was working for UCA, and that worked. But I for 3 years I'd carried on working in Nottinghamshire happily and travelling up and down at the weekends. And this organisation came up, and I'm not to dwell on it too long, but I was invited to interview. They knew that I lived in the town, and they were looking to create a shortlist. And I went to them and said, "Look, I'm not interested in running a building, but I would be curious about trying to find what the building's for, what its purpose is." And that has been my journey for the last 18 years. And I think, whilst we have, I think, quite radically transformed the physical fabric of the building, that happened on the back of us understanding what we wanted to do with it, rather than just a kind of repair, slightly apologetic model that had existed. And I'm delighted that it will continue to adapt and evolve, I'm sure, long into the future. And I'm sure if I was to come back in 10, 20 years' time, I wouldn't recognise large elements of it, because the building needs to adapt to the needs of the town, and the town is constantly changing. We all know this. And so what it does and how it shapes its programme and the things that it delivers outside of the building as well as inside the building is going to constantly evolve and change.
I mean, it's interesting that you make that distinction, or at least I found it interesting when we've talked about it, because in order to create the Maltings and its enterprise, if I can put it that way, you need the building. And of course, at one point, the threat was there that we wouldn't have that building. So step one was saving the building.
Without a doubt. And I know I built, I built upon the adventure and the bravery and the kind of tenacity and generosity of a lot of people who came before me. And you are right. But I think there's something interesting in that story, is that when the building was saved in 1969, as I understand it, there's a kind of legendary conversation that happened on a golf course about the building and whether it should be saved or knocked down. And they decided to save the building and then said, what should we do with it? So the purpose came after the saviour. And I have to say, I've tried to turn that to my advantage in that it isn't a purpose-built building. You know, I wouldn't have the first idea how to run the Yvonne Arnault in Guildford, a really great and, you know, thriving organisation with a very different set of challenges, because the architecture is telling you what to do in the building.
Yeah.
The great delight of the Maltings is it doesn't do that. It doesn't say, we do this. We sit and look at the stage for 2 hours. You can play in all sorts of ways, which has been my great joy. And the other thing I would say about the building is it's an industrial building. It's not a stately home. So it feels when you go in there that work happens there, that things are made. And I think that's turning a truth to our advantage.
And, you know, you've clearly had this terrific influence on the evolution of what we now call the Maltings. I'll come back to that in a moment.
Yeah.
How much did the building influence your vision, your approach, your ethos? Because I could see the two working together. Industrial building, wasn't a theatre, if I can use that term.
Yeah.
Did that sort of strike chords with you that said, I've got flexibility here, I've got a whole range of things I could do with it?
It's a really good question. I think to some extent it did. Like, I mean, I look at Southhill Park, for example, again.
In Bracknell, you mean? The one in Bracknell, yeah.
Yeah. And I've got affection for that building, but it feels grand. It doesn't. And so you're right. When I walked into the building, I felt in tune with it. Has it affected me? I think that the relationship to craft and making has been amplified because of that building. You know, the development of the studios. And so, yes, to some extent, the building has influenced the things and the possibilities and the way in which we've thought. But to a large extent, it's, as you say, it's flexibility, and it's a lack of prescribing who we are and what we do is its extraordinary strength, you know. And I think I think there are many towns who, well, I was just going to say, I get lots and lots of people coming from, or have had lots of people coming from other bits of the country to look at the Maltings, often to building new buildings, wanting to learn the lessons of the Maltings, which is curious, isn't it? That people are going out trying to build imitative versions of a building that we found. And I have said, I mean, I used to say it to our insurers every day, if it burns down, heaven forfend, I wouldn't rebuild what was there. You'd just go and find another building.
But isn't this at the heart of, I was going to interrupt, as you do in conversations, Gav, I was thinking of this symbiotic relationship, which is perhaps unusual in that you've got the building which doesn't suggest immediately a purpose. You've got Gavin Stride, who's got a vision which we'll explore, which is about community and place and a wide range of cultural activity. The coming together of those two things seems to be an unusual set of circumstances that has borne fruit.
I feel, you know,
I'm being a bit grand, aren't I? Or am I?
Well, no, I know. You're very kind, and I thank you for that. Listen, I had a good time, you know, and you know, my mum would say, if you're not enjoying work, don't do it. And I spent 20 years largely having a really, really good time. Don't get me wrong, there were days where I was like, wow, I'm doing too much with too little here. But by and large, that's my job, was to try and not be overwhelmed and to constantly imagine, well, what can we do? How can we contribute? I know we'll talk about this, but other people talk to me about the way we responded to the pandemic in getting involved in the shopping, setting up a share store, getting involved in the hardship fund. I genuinely didn't think about it. It just seemed the most obvious thing to do. It was, and again, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, is the building's one aspect of what we do. It's not. Sorry, I didn't have this cough when I started talking to you. I'm fine. Oh yeah, the building is just an asset. Like, and it may surprise people that we do a lot of touring theatre to village halls out of the Maltings. We need a van to do that. I don't run a van.
No.
That isn't what I do. I don't run a building. We have fantastic people that look after and make sure that that building runs efficiently and well. But my role was to constantly think, how can we use this to the betterment of all of the people of the town? And people who were at the first AGM that I was at will attest to the truth that I stood up and said, my job is to help the town feel safer, live longer, and be happier. And I spent the last 18 years trying to do that in a number of different ways, ranging from, the work we did around identifying craft as a characteristic of the town, so the work we did during the pandemic, to the work that we're doing regionally and nationally. That's all been driven by this central ambition to go, let's make this town feel special.
Yeah. Now, I think this applies to a lot of us. You don't really get to grips with a new role till you're in it, and that's proper due diligence. When you arrived, did you ever have those moments where you said, 18 years ago, it isn't what it is now, when you said, oh goodness, have I taken on the wrong thing here? Is this going to be a struggle? Is it, those negative thoughts, were they that occurred to you at the start of your time at the Maltings?
I probably shouldn't say this, but I spent the first 2 years feeling like I was in a war zone. That's overstating it, but feeling like I needed to wear Teflon but at the same time hear and listen to people's concerns and complaints. That there wasn't a week went by when there wasn't a letter in the Herald bemoaning this aspect of what we'd done or that aspect. And we had run on apology and gratitude for too long. We were sort of going to people cap in hand, and I didn't. It's not a natural place for me to be apologetic and thankful, I'm afraid. And so I set out on a strategy saying, look, we're fantastic and we can really make a difference to everyone's lives.
Overstating it at the time?
It was. It was, absolutely. But that's what leadership is about, is describing what we can be as much as what we are. And so, I like to feel that when I left, I was describing more accurately who we are than when I arrived, and yes, I was full of uncertainty and doubt, but again, I would say, and I used to feel like I was spinning plates, every day, and oftentimes my response to feeling overwhelmed was to take something else on.
I said I'd
do is stand back,
I said I'd come back to this. It's called the Maltings.
Yeah.
Now, so it's the Maltings and Farnham and Maltings. It's right at the centre of the town, but it doesn't describe what it does, as you said. Why did you call it the Maltings?
That's a fair question. So I arrived, it was called Farnham Maltings Arts Centre, and I felt like the language put people off. I think people have an imagined view of what an art centre is, that it puts on pottery classes and ballet on a Thursday, and all of which we do. But I was really interested in dropping the language that made people imagine who we were, and then ascribing to us a set of values around being welcoming, engaging, curious, fun, easy to access. And so I think a lot of people, in our town, in our community, would think, I don't go to an art centre, that's not for me. Whereas they felt more comfortable going, oh yeah, it's the Maltings, like that's just that building there, and that proved to be the case. So it was one small step in a much richer kind of set of decisions. Now I should tell you, Richard, I didn't have a plan 18 years ago. I didn't know I was going to end up here. What I did is came in there with a set of values and a set of beliefs. I still believe unequivocally that being involved in culture, whatever that, in all of the ways it is, describing who we are, making sense of the world, makes us healthier and happier. That lots of people's individual challenges come from feeling confused or feeling disconnected. We know, and as you know, I'm sure, well, I'll say it now, that over the last 3 or 4 years, we've really grown the work around health and the ways in which we can engage people on the margins of our society. So things like Men in Sheds, the Dementia Choir, the knitting groups, the social knitting groups, all of those are designed partly around getting people active in a cultural activity, but as much about getting people to connect and to feel part of this town.
Whatever their interest, really, which is
that's right.
Don't you think labels and actually language can be an unintentional barrier to people? So if you call it an arts centre, there'll be people who feel, well, that's not for me. There'll be plenty who'll say yes, it is. But has this been a conscious intention, or is it something that's at the root of your value system and belief? That
it's right at the middle of my values, which is I don't think art is one thing or not another thing. I don't think there's a high art and a low art. You know, that kind of notion that ballet is more important than hip hop, or that I don't know, opera is more important than West End musicals. I just don't hold that. People engage in culture in all sorts of ways. And by the way, I would include in that cake decorating and gardening and the people that make their own clothes. People describe who they are and are creative and in a gazillion ways. We forget and disconnect the truth that we tell stories to our children at night time, that we sing at our football matches, that we read poetry at our funerals. All of those are legitimate cultural activities that we sort of separate out from a view of what art is and isn't. And I think one of the greatest delights of my tenure at the Maltings is actually to see the Arts Council and the way it's shifted from pursuing excellence at all costs to recognizing that the way to get to excellence is by encouraging participation. And that the more people that get involved in participation, the more excellent our arts will be.
I don't want to forget the Arts Council, which I'll come to shortly, but I mean, the Maltings is a centre for activity for people with whatever their interest in the town. But I was surprised in talking to you a little while ago that you have extended the reach of the Maltings, both regionally and nationally, through something called the Home, is it the Home Network?
House Network.
House Network. Sorry, House Network. That was new to me. I'm sure it'll be new to quite a few people looking at this conversation. So what is the House Network? Where did it start and where have you got to? It's pretty large, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 178 venues.
Gosh.
There's a different. So first of all, I need to say to you, the Arts Council does not fund Farnham Maltings for the work it does in Farnham, for the town work that it does.
Right.
We created a model fairly quickly that meant that building, that glorious building, can be self-sustaining. So the Arts Council invests in us to do the work that we do across the region and across the country and internationally. And so the work we do regionally through the House Network is a really simple idea, which is to say we are taught to compete with each other from very early age. And I absolutely believe that the way in which we can ensure the quality of our lives for all of the people, particularly in the Southeast, and I'll come back to that in a minute, is if we collaborate better, if we cooperate and share resources. And so I put a call out, very simple, saying, here am I working in Farnham. There are people who are working in Bicester and Banbury and, all over the Southeast, trying to solve the same problems. Why don't we start to share and work together? And I thought we might get 20 or 30 people come back.
How many letters did you send out, Gav?
Oh, we sent out, I think, probably 200.
Wow. So this was a real intent to set up this new enterprise.
Yeah, but I genuinely thought I'd get 20 or 30 of the willing. In the first instance, we had about 150 people contacted us and said, yes, we absolutely want to connect. And I was astounded. There are people up and down the length and breadth of this region who are making it up, just like I was, who are trying to do the best with the resources they have. And so I then went to the Arts Council and said, look, here are a whole heap of organisations who are absolutely committed to improving the quality of their towns. And let us not forget that the Southeast is made up of towns more than any other region.
Yeah.
You know, if you take London out, and London isn't part of the Southeast for Arts Council purposes, then we don't have a Bristol or a Manchester or a Birmingham. We're a region where people live in small towns, and there are people in all of those towns trying to improve the arts offer in their communities. And so I went to the Arts Council and said, look, we need to work collaboratively through all of that group of people. And so, and to their credit, they said, yeah, we think that's great.
Oh.
You know, I have a reputation for having often asked awkward questions. And so that was a moment where I just said to the Arts Council, there's a better way of doing this. And to their credit, they said yes. And so we now program collectively, we share intelligence, we do professional development training. We've run programs like an apprentice scheme, which had over 60 young people coming through that program between 18 and 24, I believe, who wouldn't be able to, you know, who weren't going into higher education, have probably fallen through the education system. We were able to place 60 of those young people in this network of 180 and give them some real practical work experience for 6 months. And many of those people have gone on to be employed and work in those environments.
It sounds, the way you describe it, and again, I was surprised at this, 180 different locations and venues brought together into this house network and driving collaborations, which is never easy, is it? You know, it's an easy thing to say, it's not an easy thing to achieve. But you then extended this concept of collaboration internationally, didn't you? So isn't there another network that you've created called the Caravan?
Yeah,
network?
there is. So actually, just to reel back, Caravan came before the house network.
Right.
So the international work came first. And that was, I mean, I mean, again, I probably shouldn't say this, but I had a sense when I got to Farnham that the kind of prevailing attitude was that Farnham Maltings was for Farnham people.
Yeah.
And it was very inward looking. It was very, very, yeah. And
is that wrong? Is that wrong for a...
I absolutely think we need to learn and share with the best practice wherever it is happening around the world. And so I was like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't improve, but the way in which we improve is not by constantly looking inwards. Let's see who we can connect with and who we can make sense. How are other people around the world making the sense of the same problems as us? And I would suggest, and I'm sure you've heard me say this to you before, but, you know, Yellowknife, wherever it is in northern Canada, has more in common with Farnham than Farnham has with Birmingham. In other words, it's about scale, and it's about where policy is made and the ways in which we solve our problems. And so I was really, really keen for us to see ourselves both locally, and I'm hugely proud that the Maltings is I think now a kind of signature organization within the town, but that it was known and it had a kind of international perspective, so that it was always saying, you know, if we're going to run a knitting festival, what's the best practice happening in that community around the world, and how do we learn, how do we share, and do we share it back? And that's one of the things that led to Farnham becoming a world craft city, which I know is, again, a piece of vision. We're not there yet.
No.
We've described it, we've got the signs up, things are starting to happen, but I have a real hope that over the next 10, 20 years, we really put meat on the bone of that idea, in the same way that, you know, everyone's comfortable with Hay-on-Wye being a book town. It wasn't always a book town. It's not a centre of publishing.
It was almost serendipity that created Hay as a book town and the festival, wasn't it?
That's right. And I think we could do the same with craft. I think we can, and who wouldn't want to use craft? It's such an inclusive, democratic form where people learn from each other and delight in making. I'm super excited. I think I'm excited about a lot of things. I'm excited by the way that towns are responding to the pandemic, and I think, or post-pandemic, and I think we're going to see a rise of localism.
Yeah, you've mentioned, not exactly in passing, but you've mentioned the Farnham Connect network that you started at the start of the pandemic or shortly after the start of the pandemic. As you say, seemed a natural fit with the community ethos that you've got as the Farnham, as if you like, the hub of a network. That speaks to this vision of yours of the Maltings as a location being the hub of something that supports community, that can reach out to community. I mean, those two things came together neatly, but it wasn't easy to get the network Connect network up and running, was it?
It wasn't. I mean, I think as a theatre maker and as someone working in the arts and in the third sector, and I don't think I fully realised this until that moment. You acquire a set of skills to do with the way in which you talk to people, the way in which you make people feel included, that were absolutely chimed with a particular need at that time. And people may forget, but at the beginning of the pandemic, there were a number of people sort of negotiating to be the lead organisation. You know, people were setting up initiatives left, right, and centre. And so I wasn't interested in becoming another player in that. But I was interested in saying, how can we do three things? How can we not duplicate effort? Because if everyone's running off doing, you know, the same things in different places, that doesn't make sense. That things should be delivered at the most local level. And again, people may forget, but there was sort of county council was imposing plans, government was imposing plans, that Waverley had its thoughts about what should happen. The town council was, you know, and then there were other third sector organisations all vying for trying to deliver. So it seemed to me that we needed to start at the most local level, that we shouldn't duplicate, and that we should share intelligence. Those were the three principles on which, and so if I did anything, it was very simply to just remind people of those principles, that and everyone subscribed to that, because when you hear it, you go, that's right, you know.
Yeah, well, it's interesting in a sense, because you weren't town council, or not that that's any criticism at all of any other organization. It's because you weren't any of those things. You could be something, if you see what I mean, because you weren't identified with any particular interest other than, can we get together here and help Farnham as a community, as a town. I mean, I used to track the number of people that were attending your meetings. I mean, we had 25, 26.
50. We went to 50 on it. Right.
I was going to say, and it grew just amazing. Yeah.
But you struck on something else, which other people recognise. And you know, let me be clear that the town council and, you know, Waverley really stepped into that space and did extraordinary things. So, you know, all I was trying to do was something over and above what they could do. There were things that the town council in particular were uniquely placed to deliver. My curiosity was to see, how do we link up not only those, but, and you will know because you used to attend the meetings, I was delighted at the range of organisations that came on board in that. You know, people like the emergency planning, the MP's office, the health service, the police, the fire brigade, the ambulance service, many churches. And it felt like the richer that set of connections became, the richer Farnham Connects was. You know, our ability to reach networks and resources. So I remember meetings when, you know, Surrey Centre for Domestic Abuse came on and sort of explained their particular challenges, which were real and, you know, often went under the radar. And because of the network of people in the room, some solutions immediately came up about how we moved, or how they moved people who were in crisis to Guildford, which is the nearest centre, which hadn't been available until that moment. Similarly, the Williams Society, an extraordinary organisation that most of us didn't even know existed, who work with people who are partially blind and blind, came to the fore and have continued to feel like they're part of the community of Farnham. And that really, really thrills me.
I mean, it was extraordinary. And again, it sort of, for me, summarized your whole approach about not calling it an art centre. It's called the Maltings, and the Maltings gives you flexibility to be all sorts of things. But it was this sense of we're here for the community, and never has that been better demonstrated, really, than during that very unusual time. But I want to move us on, or perhaps a little bit back. You mentioned funding, an Arts Council in the news, and the budget restrictions or changes in funding, etc. I don't think many people would realise what you said just a moment ago about the Maltings does not rely on Arts Council funding, but the Arts Council plays to funding the network you've set up. How robust is therefore the Farnham Maltings business model?
Well, I mean, I think it's strong because you take the money away, and I think there would still be a core organisation. It might feel more like a village hall. It might not have the energy and the purpose, but it would continue to operate. The Arts Council have had a bit of a kicking recently, and I think I need to jump to their defence. And I don't just say that because they've invested in some of the ideas and the things that we do. There was more money on the table in this most recent spending round than in previous rounds. The DCMS gave them something like 2% extra money. So there has not been a cut in national funding to the arts. There have been a set of decisions about who are the organisations best placed to deliver our ambitions. And that's why, to be frank, ENO got cut. It was because the Arts Council took the view that there were other organisations who could deliver their strategy better than they. I'm not going to measure this, I'm not going to comment on the judgment, but that was the judgment. I know that Farnham Maltings, I mean, I would be stupid if I didn't, read the strategy and go, how do we respond to that? I know that the Arts Council kind of delights in investing in Farnham Maltings because of the work and the principles that have underpinned it thus far. And I'm sure that Peter, as he gets his feet under the table and starts...
Your successor, yeah.
My successor is a decent man who I'm sure will continue to move the organisation forward. We'll do similarly. We'll go, how can we be useful to our local authorities, our funders? And we have to do that. If we're not useful... So, I mean, the only way that the Maltings can continue to thrive and adapt is to be more useful to more people. And that's what all I've tried to do in the time that I was there, is to make sure that more people felt like, oh, that organisation is for me,
One of the other things I didn't realise, and perhaps I'm showing my lack of understanding, is that, in a sense, the Maltings has been an incubator for fresh work, for work that's shared. We've already covered the networks and one thing and another. What's your most successful, as you look back on your time, one of the most successful things that has come out of that for you?
Well, that's I'm going to answer it in a couple of ways. So one of the companies, and you are right, I have an innate curiosity about the next generation. Maybe that's partly the same thing that's led me to leave, is to see what will the next generation do with this legacy. But one of the companies that we supported, Little Bowl, who just got regular funding themselves, and they won an Olivier Award last year for a piece that they made at the Royal Opera House. That thrills me, that we were able to spot that talent and support them. But I think the show, the way you are pointing me, and I have to mention it, is that I should say about my own theatre practice is I make work for village halls, rural communities. That's where I'm happiest. It's an audience that I understand and I delight in working for. And I'm really curious at making, work that people might describe as progressive or new, but that is also popular. I don't think the two things are opposite. And last year we made a show called The Syrian Baker, which told the story about two men deciding to go back to Syria. And, it's hard to talk about this now, given the events of the last month, but have gone back to Syria to try and rebuild their community. They, in a moment of realization, they recognize that if they don't go back and try and make a difference, then actually their country will be always poorer. That's the choice they make. That play was called The Syrian Baker. It toured nationally to Scotland, Wales, and England, sold out everywhere we went, and was the winner of the Play of the Year against, I have to say, a West End production from the National and a regional theatre. And so the fact that a piece of work that was made in Farnham for Village Halls won the Writers Guild of Great Britain Play of the Year award. I mean, it was just so unexpected. It was extraordinary to have done that. And so that's probably one of the moments that I feel most proud of. But I'm not going to sit there and go, I was the man that did that.
No.
I'm always going to be going, what can I do next? How,
Well, so we started looking at, so what was Farnham like when you came 18 years ago, etc. So now you can reflect on some differences, if you will. You said you previously were in the North Nottinghamshire coalfield area, and you came to Farnham. Now, the obvious question is, what were the differences? Because I suspect they're quite easy to discern, but I'm not going to ask you that, Gav. I'm going to ask you, what do you draw as the similarities between those two very different at headline level environments? What links them?
Well, people in the end, that given the opportunity, people can grow, and that everyone has more potential in themselves to understand, to play than they might often recognise. I am going to, even though you didn't ask me the question, I am going to say that when I
knew you would.
Well, when I got here, people assumed that I'd come from a poor community to an affluent community. I felt the opposite. I felt that I'd come from somewhere that was much clearer about who it was, and what their sense of place was. Let's leave aside the way in which North Nottinghamshire has been decimated since over the last 20 years, particularly by drugs. But and many of those villages are on their knees. Nevertheless, there is a kind of vibrancy and an aspiration to move forward, to be live. And when I got to Farnham, I felt like it was poor. I don't mean economically.
No.
And I think culturally, spiritually, socially, people felt isolated. Everyone was, well, not everyone, but everyone was living here, but not, the large parts of our community don't feel connected in terms of the place in which they live. And so, if I've done something, I've tried to bring that kind of spirit of live here. And that's why I say I feel optimistic about these moments, because I think people are increasingly recognizing that. I feel like that glass box that we put on the front of the building is a perfect metaphor in a way for what we've achieved, which is no matter who, first of all, you can see through it. And secondly, whoever walks up to that door, it opens. We stole the idea straight from a supermarket, and it was like, we need to make it as easy to walk into that building as is possible.
So it's another barrier that you've removed. We've talked about language, we've talked about reaching out and community and purpose and place, but equally it's as simple as an entrance that you can look through that isn't a barrier to opening the door and saying, oh, will they all look at me when I walk in?
That's right. And some of your members will remember there used to be a set of wooden doors, and I would see people thinking, actually, it's not for me, I can't go in.
Yeah. Well, look, we're coming to the end of this conversation. You and I could chat for a long time, but what about Gavin Stride? What's next for you, Gavin?
Well, I think I'm going to walk, I'm going to write, and I'm going to wander. I'm going to delight in not having the trappings of running an institution, and I won't deny that the last 2 years have been tough. Not that I haven't enjoyed some of the things that came out of that period, but it was, you carry 80, 90 people as we do at the Maltings. That comes at a price of just feeling like I need to look after this institution. And I'm already enjoying being freed from that and being able to go, oh, I've now got energy. And I've come to understand the phrase spend my time in a way that I probably didn't ever think about it before, which is time is a commodity and I have choices about the way I spend it, just like I spend my money. And that sometimes that might not make economic sense, but it will absolutely make sense to me in how I spend my time. So I spent 2 days last week repairing something in our house that had been broken for 30 years. And the pleasure I got from doing that was, undeniable. So we shall see. We shall see.
Well, I can hear my phone ringing, so it knows that we've come to the end of the conversation.
Very good.
I know we haven't even covered the Surrey Cultural Partnership, which you're involved in as well.
No, indeed.
Well, one phrase on that. That's important as you leave the Farnham Maltings, but you're involved with the Surrey Cultural Partnership.
It is, and it has many of the values that Farnham connects to. It's saying, you'll be aware of the phrase levelling up, and the government, has made a decision to put its investment to areas of greatest need. That instantly said to me, Surrey's going to have to care for itself, and it's going to have to do many of the same things that we tried to do in Farnham, which is to make sure that we make better use of our collective resources, that we share intelligence, that we support and encourage each other, and that we find out what's particularly true about Surrey and say it to the rest of the world. When I first came to Surrey, people were like, "Oh, who gives a damn about Surrey?" No, it's all full of stockbrokers and rich people. And of course, that's not true. That's just not true. There are, there's abject poverty in small pockets across this county, and so that needs to be challenged. And we need to articulate what our challenges are and what our ambitions are for the next 10 years. So one of the things we're doing, one of the major things we're doing, is writing a cultural strategy for Surrey. What is Surrey now? What is its good? And where would we like to see it in 10 years' time? And that document will be available in the autumn. I already know that Surrey County Council is saying, well, we'd like to adopt it as a strategy for ourselves, because laughably, forgive me for saying, Surrey doesn't have a cultural strategy, which says to me, well, how do you know whether you're doing any good if you don't have a bloody strategy?
Well, Gavin, we'll wait to see that. I mention it at the end because I think it's an element of you spending your time wisely. We will look forward to seeing how that time is spent and the fruits of it. But for the moment, I'd like to finish by saying thank you to you for what you've done for Farnham, for the Maltings. And I hope, as we've learned through this conversation, the reach is much wider, regionally, nationally, and even internationally. Gavin, thank you for your time.
Thanks, my friend. You take care.